Hi everyone. In this short video, I'm going to go over some design principles for PowerPoint presentations, particularly do's and don'ts for PowerPoint slide design. Notably, I'm going to use the template that's available in PowerPoint to prove the point your book makes about how some of the templates are very bad designs. Though it might seem pretty simple, the green and yellow in this template are very wearing on the eyes. It makes the eyes hurt after a while, and it will get worse in this presentation. I also want to point out that I'm going to be showing you things you shouldn't do, so try to pay close attention to which ones are things you can do and things you shouldn't do. Okay, let's begin. When you start your PowerPoint, the first slide should be basically a title slide. You want a slide that's pretty blank. In this case, it's not fully developed. I might, if I was doing this professionally, have a title, an image, and maybe my name. Something that is easy to rest on while people are coming in and sitting down and talking. You do not want to start your slideshow with the first piece of information that you want to discuss, because people will ask you questions about it before you're ready to discuss it, and you don't want to show your hand before you're ready. Have a title slide that's sitting up there and resting while you're getting ready to start your slideshow. And then when you're ready, this will be behind you while you introduce yourself. And you absolutely should introduce yourself. Tell us your name, make us feel like you're very personable, very friendly. And in a longer presentation, people often tell stories like, this is how I came to discover this idea, or this is why I was asked to explain this to you today. But in a shorter presentation, it's okay to just tell us your name and tell us what you're going to talk about. After your title slide, it's a good idea towards the very beginning to have a forecast slide. This is kind of like a table of contents or a plan. Give your audience a plan for what you're going to discuss in your PowerPoint so that we have a sense of where you're going, where you've been, where you're going to go next. Okay, so you need that on an actual slide. It can be very short, very basic. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. In terms of speaking, when you're going through your PowerPoint, you're going to go ahead and signpost throughout the presentation. So signposting is a phrase that refers to, signs, like signs on the side of the highway that tell, drivers where they're going, where they've been, right? So an example of a signpost phrase would be something like, all right, guys, that was the budget. Next, I'm going to talk about the timeline. You don't have to do this for every single transition, okay? You just do it when you feel like the transition might not be clear to people, okay? And you want them to understand where they are in that forecast you gave at the beginning of the presentation. Signposts can also include summaries of major points. Again, you don't want to do this every single time because it'll seem repetitive. But let's say you spent 4 or 5 minutes going over a budget, you gave us lots of numbers, we're all overwhelmed. You could, when you're signposting, also summarize your major points. Like, here's the number one thing I want you to know about the budget before we move on to the timeline. And that helps, again, for the viewer or listener to understand where we are in the forecast, where we are in the plan, and to understand the major ideas that you're trying to drive home. Okay, moving on to talking about the slides. You want to have about 4 or 5 bullets per page per slide. Anything more than that, you need to divide it between multiple slides, which is totally okay. And you want short bullets. 5 to 8 words per line is the gold standard. That would be perfect. Of course, sometimes you need something a little bit longer than that, but the main idea here is that you do not need complete sentences on a PowerPoint. You need short phrases. Again, you are the person who's telling us the idea. We are listening to you tell us the idea. The PowerPoint is just helping me grasp the main ideas of what you're saying, and I don't usually need a full sentence to grasp the main idea of what you said. And in fact, if you put really long, complete sentences on the page, I'm going to be tempted to read the sentence instead of hearing what you're saying. So shorter is better, and then 4 or 5 bullets per page or per slide. Anything more than that, you need to divide it up. Importantly, you can have more than 1 slide per topic. So just to keep using the same examples, if you have a budget and it's taking you 5 or 6 5 or 6 bullets to explain the budget. Maybe you put 3 bullets on one slide and 3 bullets on another slide. If you have, 5 or 6 bullets and a graph, then you need slides for bullets and a separate slide for the graphs. So you could have the budget explained over 3 slides. What's important though is that the title at the top of the slide, here my title is Good Presentations, the title at the top of the slide has to say budget, budget, budget on all of them so that the viewer knows where we are in that forecast that you showed us a couple of slides ago. And importantly, you do not want to put continued, because if I look up and I see continued, I don't know we're continuing what. So it's better to just have budget over and over again than write budget and then on the next 2 slides write continued. Now, you cannot have more than 1 concept per slide. So to keep using the same example, let's say I have budget and I only have 1 or 2 things I want to say about the budget, and then I have a timeline and I only have 1 or 2 things I want to say about the timeline. It doesn't matter if I don't have that much to say about either one. They cannot go on a slide together because they are not the same topic. Okay, think about PowerPoint slides as almost like paragraphs. If you're starting a new topic, you need a new paragraph. If you're starting a new topic, you need a new slide. All right, your book goes over this, but this is important to cover. You should not have transitions and animations. If you've ever seen a PowerPoint where the text sort of flies onto the slide, it comes from outside the margins and then suddenly like flies in and lands where it belongs, or the slides fade in and out in really weird ways between the slides. Those are transitions and animations. They are really unprofessional. They look like something from middle school and high school. And on top of that, they are incredibly distracting. If you're in the middle of telling me something really interesting that I'm really intrigued by, that I really want to hear more about, and all of a sudden you hit enter and a transition starts, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement. My eye is drawn to the slide, even if I didn't need the slide at that moment and was really into what you were saying. But now I'm distracted and I'm looking at the screen. So you don't want to use transitions or animations because they keep your reader or viewer focused on the slide when they should be focused on you unless they need the slide. The slide is a support system between you and the audience. If you insist, as your book explains, you can use bullet level transitions. Bullet level transitions help each bullet show up one by one on the screen. So here I have 2 bullets. If I had installed a transition, I could make 1 bullet appear and then I'd hit enter and then make the second bullet appear. Now that can be helpful, but it can also be can backfire on you because you have to hit enter or the space bar every single bullet. If you're in a presenting situation where you're depending on someone else in the room to hit enter every time you're ready for the next slide, that person now has to hit enter between every slide and also for every single bullet. So that can backfire on you. Know your presenting situation and then weigh whether that's going to help you or hurt you. All right, images. You are not ever going to use clip art in a professional situation. Images should be deliberate and never decorative. If you are going into a clip art menu or searching Google for a picture and you're installing it on your slide and the only reason why is because you think it will make the slide look prettier, then delete the clip art and do not continue with that, okay? That is not helpful, it's distracting, and it's unprofessional. However, you can use images. If you have a graph that's going to help me understand what you're saying, if you have a photograph that's going to help me understand what you're saying, a table, a map, so many images are useful and those are totally okay. If they're going to help you explain your idea to me in a better way, then those are absolutely usable. But you should not be using images just to decorate. Something that confuses students that I want to go over is that does not mean that you cannot use images to show relationships. I've had students before who want to create basically like a flow chart on their slide, like A leads to B leads to C, and they have to go into the clip art menu to get arrows to build that flow chart, and then they're confused because I said no clip art. Obviously, in that case, that's helping explain information to the viewer, so in that case, it's okay. However, if it's not helping explain the information, if the information is just as clear without the image, in this case, if this slide is just as clear without that picture of a monitor, then I don't need a picture of a monitor. Okay, and as I said, backgrounds. Please do not have bad color schemes, ugly backgrounds, and absolutely never change the color scheme in the middle of a slideshow. So if you start with navy blue background and white font, it's got to be navy blue background and white font 100% of the way through. Okay? And be careful with colors because some people are colorblind. My brother's colorblind. He can't see the color red. So this would not work very well for him. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about people you're presenting for. All right. Be careful with long sentences, lots of text on the slide. Make sure your font's not too small. Make sure people can read it from the back of the classroom or the room you're presenting in. And do not overuse bold, italics, and font sizes. Okay, all of these have actually been covered in other parts of the presentation, so let's just revisit. You can't use long sentences. Why? Because you don't need them, and they force me to try to read instead of listen. Okay, so bullets that are short are better than long sentences. Small fonts make readability difficult. If you're trying to use a small font, it's probably because you're putting too much information on the PowerPoint slide to begin with. Divide it between more than one slide and make the font a readable size. And then overusing bold, italics, and fonts. In this case, people are often trying to draw attention to a particular phrase or word, but they forget that they are presenting, right? So let's say there's one word in a sentence that you really want to draw people's attention to. Well, you are a presenter and you can actually say, guys, I'd really like it if I could just draw your attention to this one sentence right here, and I want you to focus on this phrase right here, and you point to the phrase with your hand. We don't need bold or italics, and we have you to explain that to us. But also, bold and italics and all of that can make the PowerPoint harder to read. Bold can make it harder to see the edges of the letters from across the room. So simpler is better. You can use bold and italics, but really, really rarely. If there's something you want to draw our attention to, do it through your presentation. Now, if you have to have a quote or a paragraph, that should always be unbulleted on a PowerPoint slide by itself. Now, this should not appear very often. It should be really, really rare that you need something that can't be bulleted. But let's say you were explaining to an investor why something can't be done, and the reason it can't be done is there's this law, there's this code that you guys would be violating, so you want to copy and paste the code to show people the code that is preventing your project from moving forward. So you're going to put this on a PowerPoint slide. In that case, you would put it on a PowerPoint slide by itself, and then you would walk the viewer through why this code is important. However, you should absolutely try to avoid putting paragraphs on PowerPoints, and if you do put a paragraph or a long quote on a PowerPoint slide, it better be something that you intend to discuss at length. One of the most frustrating things in the world as a viewer, and many of you have probably experienced this, is when somebody presenting a PowerPoint slide puts paragraphs of information on the PowerPoint behind them and then never discusses the information. And so then you're torn between trying to read the paragraph behind them or listen to what they're trying to say. If they didn't need to read it or discuss it, then it was not supporting the idea they're trying to explain. They didn't need it to explain the idea to you, so they never discussed it. But then they still put it on a PowerPoint. It should have been deleted. So if it's needed to explain an idea, absolutely use it and keep it on a slide by itself. But if it is not needed and you know you're not going to discuss it, then don't put it on a PowerPoint slide. All right, when it comes to charts, same principle. If you have a chart or a graph or a photograph that you want to show, they really should go on a slide by themselves and nothing else on it. Again, we have you to explain it to us. So in this case, I have a graph, and you, the presenter, would explain to me what this graph means. What you should not do is include an explanation of the graph on the slide, because now, again, I'm going to be trying to decide between reading this while you're talking or listening to you and ignoring it. So you're going to discuss it and explain it to me, so I don't need an explanation on the slide. Plus, it just made the graph share space, which made the graph smaller. It's much easier to have the graph by itself, simple, and you explain it to me. And again, this is that gratuitous clip art that we don't need. It's not helping at all, and it's not professional. Okay, now just like I did with the graphs, with the good example and the bad example, I want to go over bulleted lists. Not bullets on a slide, but a list. When you are making a list, there are grammatical rules behind lists that a lot of you guys have trouble following sometimes, and I've commented on it before for a lot of you when we did when a lot of you guys did the memo introducing a new policy, and for example, you listed things that were okay in a dress code and now not okay in a dress code. Bulleted lists have to have one kind of information. For example, if you're listing things people can do, you can't in the middle of a list start listing things they can't do. Okay, that's two different kinds of information. Or to think of it one way, you can't start listing animals and halfway through the list start listing plants, right? It's confusing to the reader. So you need to make sure that your list includes only one kind of information. And number two, they have to be structured the same. If one bullet is a complete sentence, all of the bullets have to be a complete sentence. If one bullet starts with a verb, all of the bullets should start with a verb. So here's an example of a bad list. All right, and here's my list. Things that a bad list does. One bullet starts with a number, starting a second bullet with a verb. PowerPoint has a lot of options which can make it easy to design a bad PowerPoint. Practice, right? And so this is not all the same kind of information. Bullet one starts with a number, and the second bullet starts with a verb, right? And then I have a complete sentence, and then I have a one-word phrase. Instead, I can change all of these by changing what my list says. I'm going to eliminate this bullet here, and I'm going to change the other ones so that they actually match, okay? Things to avoid doing. Don't start bullets differently. Don't get distracted by all the different options. Don't change the topic mid-list, right? And so all of those bullets start the same. They're all about the same length, right? So I have don't, verb, don't, verb, don't, verb. All three of them are about things I can avoid doing. I never change the topic of the list mid-list. Make sure that if you have a list anywhere on your bullet point, anywhere on your PowerPoint, or anywhere, if you're writing an email or anything like that, and you have to create a list, should discuss only one kind of information for the entire list, and they should be structured the same. If they start with a verb, they all start with a verb. If it's a complete sentence, they should all be complete sentences, and so on. Okay, now that we've gotten those things out of the way, and hopefully those have been clear to you, we're going to go ahead and just go over some tips for the actual presentation in terms of how to interact with the PowerPoint. Okay, you need to make sure you know your content. So you don't want to get to a PowerPoint slide, have a couple of seconds of silence while you read it, and then tell us what you have to say about the slide. It should be seamless. You should know it, and you have to practice this, okay? And you want to not get ahead of your slides, which you know that you're not going to do by practicing it. So if you're working on a presentation, my husband is working on one right now. If you're working on a presentation and you keep practicing that PowerPoint presentation and you realize you keep wanting to say something that is not on a slide, you need to edit it so that there is a slide there. You keep practicing it and you keep mentally wanting to skip a slide. You know, your brain doesn't really need to say that piece of information. You keep forgetting to say that piece of information, and the more you think about it, the more you think you don't need that piece of information. You need to delete that slide. You need to know your content so well that when you see the slide appear on the screen, in that first millisecond, you know what you need to talk about next, okay? So you need to practice your PowerPoint shows. You want to keep light on in the room. We've all been in the room when it's been dark watching a PowerPoint. It's the death knell. You don't want to do that. People will fall asleep on you, so keep the light on and maintain eye contact. And one thing that I tell students in real life, if you're presenting, you should be looking at the audience, not at the PowerPoint. And if it makes you nervous to look at people, one thing you can do is kind of look at the space in between people's heads, and it looks like you're looking at them, but you don't accidentally lock eyes with someone, which might make you more nervous if you're very, very nervous, but look like you're making good eye contact. Move around, seem like a friendly, personable person. Okay? If someone has a question in the middle of your PowerPoint, you can stop and take the question. Now, if you had a really good forecast, maybe you told people, hey, I'm going to go over questions at the end, then people might hold it until the end. But if people are really, really confused about something you said and they feel like they can't hear anymore until you've clarified this one thing, because I can't hear anything you're saying because I'm still in my head just churning over this idea that I can't sort out. If they interrupt you, you should stop and answer the question. And you can even build it into your PowerPoint. You can say, does anybody have any questions about the budget before I move on to the timeline? It's up to you. You can use other media as well, show a video, give a handout, so on and so forth. Don't necessarily only rely on a PowerPoint. Again, the PowerPoint is just a tool to help people who are going to hear a long lecture on something have something to look at and ground them and understand what you're saying. But that is only one of many possible tools. And a PowerPoint presentation is much more effective if you have other ways of getting their attention and explaining things. If you stop the PowerPoint to take questions, if you stop the PowerPoint to show a video, if you stop the PowerPoint to do a small group discussion, then it would be even more effective. But sometimes we're in a position where we're expected to just give a PowerPoint presentation, but try to incorporate other kinds of media. And always spell check, practice the show, and remember it's you, not the show they're wanting to pay attention to. So you're wanting to keep our attention on what you're saying as much as possible, not what the screen says. The screen is just a support system. All right, and last two tips, you do need a conclusion slide. So you want a slide where you go over your main points or review what you just went over or something like that. You do want a conclusion slide. Why? Because it helps the audience understand this is the end, okay? You can, on the conclusion slide or on a separate slide, ask for questions and let people from the audience ask you questions. There is not a scenario in which you are going to present something in the professional world and not take questions, because we're not perfect communicators. We will always have something that we didn't say quite clearly that somebody will want us to explain, okay? And if applicable, you should have a reference slide. If you had to do research to build the presentation, this is basically a works cited, PowerPoint should have them too, okay? So I hope that these principles help you understand what I'm expecting in terms of the PowerPoint. Remember that I'm expecting you to explain your idea to me. I'm expecting you to be persuasive. I'm expecting you to make me feel like, man, this is a great idea. The PowerPoint is meant to help you communicate that idea, not communicate the idea for you. And additionally, I do expect you to follow the design principles in this video. I expect you to, not use animations, have a good color scheme, know how many bullets you're allowed per slide, know how I want you to title the slides if you have to continue the same topic onto a different slide, and so on. So you're expected to know these principles, but I don't think it's rocket science. But I will say, just as a closer, even though I go over these every single semester, I always have students who hear what I say they understand what I mean, but then when I see their PowerPoint, there's still 9 bullets on a single slide, or the font is way too small, or the color scheme is really hard to read. So it's important that you really, really apply these principles, and that's why we're going to practice them this week and make sure everybody understands them. Let me know if you have any questions.